And as we came out of COVID, we realized that there were these many cross pressures, these pressures that pull people in either direction and leaders feel like they're being pulled to do opposite things. So it's the ability to internalize certain things inside of us and things that might seem to conflict, but also they have the ability to see systems both inside of a company and outside of a company. And these 5 cross pressures really drive the actions and behaviors of systems leaders today. And so what they realized is that there was a false choice. They could attract new customers and retain existing customers. We as leaders need to enter the workflow and bring AI into everything that we do. And I would love my friends in Japan as leaders to be thinking about how they can improve the speed and capabilities of their organizations.
皆さんこんにちは、山口です。今日はですね、スタンフォード大学のビジネススクールのロバート・シーゲルさんをお招きして、このデジタル AI 時代のリーダーシップについてお話をお伺いしたいと思います。まず、昨今はですね、環境変化が大変激しくなっております。例えば、このジオポリティクスのコンフリクトでありますとか、またはこのデジタルテクノロジー、AI テクノロジーが急速に変化しているということと、経済もかなり不安定化しているということでありますとか、社会もですね、人口構造がかなり変わって、若い人たちの価値観と年齢いった方の価値観が大きく違うという形で、かなり社会構造も変わってきているかと思います。こういう変化の激しい時代に、リーダーはどうあるべきか、どういうマインドセットを持つべきかということについてインタビューいたしました。で、シーゲルさんはですね、システムズリーダーというコンセプトを唱えておられます。このシステムズリーダーというのはシステムシンキングをすることがリーダーシップには必要であると。これは何かというと、一つだけ集中するんではなくて、一つのことに集中すると、それのいろんな作用、影響があるということで、いろんなことがつながり合っているということで、そのつながり合いのインパクトも理解した上で、きちっとリーダーシップを発揮していくということで、このシステムシンキングのところから、システムズリーダーという署名を設定し、また、その新たなリーダーをシステムリーダーズと名付けております。で、このシステムリーダーどんな能力が必要なのかというところで言うと、まずいろんなこのイノベーションとオペレーションの部分をきちっと両方マネジメントする、または短期的なもの、長期的なものをマネジメントするとか、またはグローバルとローカル両方マネジメントする。どちらかによるんじゃなくて、いると、ただバランスを取るんじゃなくて、それをミックスしてどうやっていくかという、オペレーティングアットインターセクションと言ってます。クロス領域をどうやってマネジメントしていくかということが一つ重要だと言っています。また将来に向けて準備していくということで、やはり現行の目の前の課題だけじゃなくて、将来に向けてどう考えていくかということの重要性も訴えております。また三つ目には、この背景をきちっと理解した上でマネジメントしていくということで、象徴的な言葉で、事実には事実プラスコンテクスト、背景があって初めて真実になるということで、トゥルースイコールファクトプラスコンテクストということで、このコンテクストをきちっと理解していくということがリーダーに求められる第3番目の能力という具合に言っております。また4番目としては、プロダクトマネージャーのように振る舞うと考えるということで、どういうことかと言いますと、プロダクトマネージャーはお客さんの声も聞くし、実際にプロダクトを開発する人々、または生産する人々の声もうまく聞いてコーディネートしていくということで、まずリーダーはいろんな人の意見を聞いて理解する能力が必要であるということは言っております。また最後には、この不確実性とまた破壊がいろんなところで起きておりますけど、こういう時代において、このリスクを推進していく、リスクをテイクしながらコントロールしていく力が必要だということを言っております。で、こういうリーダーを求められるんですけれども、具体的にリーダーは5つのクロスプレッシャーというか5つのこの相反するプレッシャーの中で意思決定をし、メンバーをリードしていかないといかんということを言っています。このクロスプレッシャーの一つ目がですね、 プライオリティということで、イノベーションと日々のオペレーションをどうやってバランスを取っていくか。片方だけになると、大体、うまくいかないということが起きますので、両方どうバランスを取るかということ、プライオリティのバランス。次に、ピープルということで、従業員の方に厳しさとエンファシー、同感力をどう一緒にバランス取っていくかということで、厳しいだけではメンバーはついていきませんし、エンファシーだけではですね、業績がなかなか上げにくいということで、この両方をどう取っていくかということについても言っております。3番目は、影響力の範囲ということで、社内だけでなくて、いろんなステークホルダー、取引先でありますとか、株主でありますとか、お客さん、こういうステークホルダーにどういう影響力を与えていくかということが重要だということを言っております。4番目が、このジオグラフィーということで、ローカルとグローバルをどうやってバランス取っていくか。昨今はですね、グローバルについてかなりローカルの要求条件が強くなってますので、新たなグローバル戦略が求められているぐらいに、グローバルの統一の部分とローカルの固有の部分をどうやってバランスを取っていくかということについても述べております。最後に、パーパスということで、これは企業の利益と社会的公正正義とどうバランス取っていくかということについてもパーパスという形で述べております。ということで、このシステムリーダーズというコンセプトのもと、こういう5つの相反するプレッシャーの中でリーダーはどういう意思決定をしていけばいいのかについて、書いた本でございます。大変私ども日本のリーダーにとってもですね、こういういろんな相反する中でどういう意思決定をしていけばいいかと大変重要になってきているかと思います。そういうフレームワーク、気づきを与える本だと思いますので、このインタビューを見ていただくとともに、また本も読んでいただければと思います。それでは対談をご覧ください。Good morning and good afternoon. Today, we'll be having a dialogue session with Mr. Seagate. We have been working closely for the past years, and Robert is also a special advisor to our organization. Today's dialogue will be following this storyline. First, we will look at the current rapidly changing business environment and why it makes system leaders so urgent. Secondly, we will dive into the core ideas from the system's leader. Then, we will bring these perspectives together and to discuss what this means for the role and capabilities of leaders in the AI and digital era. Our aim is not just to introduce the book, but to use the system leaders as a lens for our own reality. How? Its cross pressures framework. The 5 most prevalent cross pressures, including priorities, people, sphere of influence, geography, and purpose, can help us handle the concrete management tensions we already feel in the AI and digital era. The hope is that our audience leave this session with a clear mental model and a set of concrete questions for your own leadership in the AI and digital era. Robert E. Siegel is one of the leading voices in leadership research. At Stanford, he not only teaches and leads work on AI and innovation, but he also brings deep practical experience from companies around the world. His recent book, The Systems Leader, is one I have read several times, and I strongly believe it offers a powerful lens for many of the dilemmas our audience is facing today. Robert, may I invite you to introduce yourself and the purpose of writing this book?
And it's nice to see you again and all of my friends at NTT Data. I am Robert Siegel, and I am on the faculty at the Graduate School of Business at Stanford University, where I have taught 10 different academic courses and written over 117 different business cases. I also am a venture capitalist at several venture funds, including Piva Capital and Exceed Capital. I previously worked in industry. I ran a division of GE. I worked at Intel and Sun Microsystems. I was a several-time entrepreneur. I started a company that made the world's first digital picture frames, and that company got bought by Kodak. I worked for a company that was spun out of the engineering school here at Stanford that made image sensors and image processors that was bought by a successful Japanese company, Sony. And I did my undergraduate work at the University of California at Berkeley and my graduate work here at Stanford. And it's always a joy to be able to collaborate with NTT Data. And it's nice to have had the relationship we've had for the last many years. And the reason I wrote the book, The Systems Leader, one of the courses I taught at Stanford was called Systems Leadership. And for 8 years, we were studying how leadership needed to change in a world that combined digital and physical. And as we went into COVID, we realized that crisis leadership was a part of every business leader's requirements and needs to address, whether they are a C-level executive, a vice president, a director, or even a manager. And as we came out of COVID, we realized that there were these many cross pressures, these pressures that pull people in either direction and leaders feel like they're being pulled to do opposite things. And so we ended up studying about 120 different companies and leaders. And I therefore decided to write this book, The Systems Leader, which was based on the course that I co-taught with my friend and my former boss, Jeff Immelt, who used to be the CEO of GE. So that's a bit about my background and why I decided to write this particular book.
Thank you, Robert. Before we move on, I would like to share how I read this book. In an era of constant and unprecedented change, leaders must manage short-term performance and long-term strategy, while aligning very different stakeholders inside and outside the organization. The system leader is a guide to that challenge, drawing on real executive stories and offering practical, thought-provoking perspectives on how to build a workforce and an environment that are both harmonious and accountable. This is not just an interesting book for us, it's one of the key references for how we think about leadership today, which is exactly why we wanted to have this dialogue with Robert. Let's move into the first part of our dialogue, the current rapidly changing business environment.
So Yamaguchi-san, and to everybody watching, many of you may be familiar with the famous quote by Warren Buffett, the very successful investor, when he said, "It's only when the tide goes out that we see who has been swimming without a bathing suit." And when Buffett said that famous quote, he was talking about economic cycles, that when times are good, a rising tide raises all boats. But when the tide goes out and the economy slows down, or maybe there's a recession, that's when we see which companies have poor leadership, which companies don't have good unit economics. And I believe that we're now in a state of the world where the tide is out and it's staying out. That we seem to live in a world of constant crisis and increasingly rapid technological change. And if we can move forward to the next slide, we seem to have this rare combination of chaotic and unrelenting forces. We see extreme disruptions, not the least of which, for example, most recently, is the impact of AI and big technological upheavals. We see economic instability all over the world. Our preconceived notions of how economies work and how countries trade with each other has been tossed up in the air. We see geopolitical conflicts. As Yamaguchi-san, as we have this conversation, we are close to our 4th year of a land war in Europe. The global financial crisis created a lack of trust in institutions around the world. And we have changing societal structures. We see that the younger generation, sometimes referred to as Gen Z, has a very different attitude towards work and the relationship of how individuals address and approach their careers. And if we look back over the last, say, 25 years, we've had a sequence of very difficult and very challenging events happen in rapid succession. We had the dot-com meltdown. We had 9/11, the global financial crisis. What I will call populism 1.0, which was a global phenomenon, right? Brexit from the UK, yellow vests in France, Bolsonaro in Brazil, the first Trump administration. Then we had the pandemic. And since that time, we see the current difficulties on a global basis economically with the second Trump administration, the tensions between allies, and it just seems like all of this is very overwhelming for the average leader. And the question that I ask people, if we go to our next slide, is how do we navigate through the cross pressures that make or break today's companies? Now, when I think of a cross pressure to me is something that pulls us in opposite directions. We feel like I'm supposed to do A and I'm supposed to do B, and A conflicts with B. And if I do A, I'm going to get canceled for not doing B. And if I do B, I'm going to get criticized for not doing A. And you mentioned what some of these cross pressures are, and we'll talk about them more in a second. But when I've studied leaders from all over the world, it seems like they're really feeling like they don't know what to do in these rapidly changing times. So the question that I ask before we get to what will work, maybe we should take a minute and talk about what doesn't work. And if we can go to the next slide, I actually refer to some of these issues as unserious behaviors in a serious world, where we see leaders that are doing things that we describe as not what we would want our leaders to do today. For example, you might remember a few years ago when Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg were going to fight each other in a cage match, and it was written about by all over the world. It was written about in newspapers and online. And when I talked to people, I found that everybody had 2 reactions. The first reaction was, I'm going to watch it. And the second reaction was, this is wrong. Why are 2 of our most successful business leaders talking and acting and behaving this way? We see taunting from people at the political level, from both sides of the political aisle. And people will say things that are just outrageous. And in fact, if we move forward to the next slide, one of the things that I like to talk about are 5 patterns to avoid. And I write about this in the book, where we want to replace, and we see leaders replacing decorum with outrageousness, focusing on trivial goals, and ignoring changes that we don't like. Focusing on things like not realizing and accepting that we may not like that the younger generation gets all of their information from TikTok, but they get all their information from TikTok. And we have to be ready to understand that this is how people who work for us are processing information. We see sometimes when people indulge in self-righteousness as leaders, and they try to lead one side as opposed to leading everybody. And the question then is, what is compelling in today's world? And I actually believe that we have a world where we can find clarity in the chaos if we can take the systems leadership framework and apply it to the opportunities and challenges that people face today. And this is based upon all the research we did talking to these 120 different leaders and companies from all over the world and what they taught us.
Thank you, Robert. Leaders are being hit simultaneously by 4 challenges: rapid advances in AI and digital technology, increasing global fragmentation and geopolitical tension, the pressure to respond credibly to sustainability and major demographic shifts that are reshaping global demand and markets. I am acknowledged that leaders nowadays face all these challenges, but I would like to focus on the AI and digital dimension based on my experiences and knowledges. When we talk about AI, it's really part of the shift in how value is created in the economy. Firstly, digital technologies have significantly reduced transaction costs. Anything can be accessed, bought or used from anywhere, anytime. Secondly, as more products and services become digitalized, companies move into a connected and intangible economy, one where value is delivered continuously and directly to the customer, not just at the moment of sale. Thirdly, with generative AI, we are entering connect and intangible economy too, where intelligence, personalization, and real-time content creation become core value drivers. You can see how the tangible economy and this connected intangible economy now coexist. And advances in generative AI also increasingly add the sophistication of the connected and intangible economy. In this slide, I demonstrated the differences of the characteristics between the tangible economy with the connected intangible economy too. Since the economy has changed, the management paradigm has to change as well. On the left side is a traditional model, detailed planning and top-down, hierarchical organizational structures, linear thinking that assumes the future is certainly extended from the past, and success measured mainly by sales, production, and profit. On the right side is what the connected intangible economy demands. Leaders will need to start from a clear vision, mobilize people, and fund a rapid experiment with flat, team-centered organizations and a talent mindset that is exponential, future-back, open in communication, and able to leverage AI as a partner. Now, let's move into the second part of our dialogue, the systems leader. Before coming to the core idea of this book, let me explain what is systems thinking. The name system leader comes from systems thinking. Systems thinking starts from the idea that everything is connected. It is a way of seeing how a single action can create unexpected second and third order effects. So, leaders have to look beyond the immediate impact and understand how it will ripple through the rest of the system. For example, if a new highway is built for the benefit of the people, more people commute by car, fewer people take the train, the railway companies' revenue fall and services are cut. And in the end, people who cannot drive may lose access to transportation. As a result, these reduce the benefit of the people. This is the system thinking approach. Next, let's invite Robert to explain more detail on the systems leader.
So I defined what a systems leader is. is somebody who fundamentally does two things. Number one, they internalize certain dualities inside of who they are. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. And the second thing that they do is they see interactions between parts inside of a company, functions like marketing and engineering and manufacturing and sales. And they also see how a company interacts with its ecosystem. And they understand how an organization might be affected by suppliers or by customers, and how their actions might also impact the ecosystem. So it's the ability to internalize certain things inside of us and things that might seem to conflict, but also they have the ability to see systems both inside of a company and outside of a company. And when we studied the leaders in the 8 years that we were doing our research, we found that there were 5 of those cross pressures that I referred to earlier that came up more than any others. The first one is priorities. How do we as individuals succeed at both execution and innovation at the same time? The second one was, how do we lead our people with both strength and holding people accountable, but also with empathy? Third, how do we think about our sphere of influence? How do we think about understanding both internal and side of our organization as well as external? Fourth is geography. Geography, how do we simultaneously think about both local and global? And then lastly, what we'll talk about at the end, the fifth cross pressure is purpose. How do we be true to our own ambitions as leaders and as individuals for what we want to accomplish for our careers, but also think of ourselves as statesmen or stateswomen or stewards of our organization? And these 5 cross pressures really drive the actions and behaviors of systems leaders today. We'll see that systems leaders fundamentally do 4 things. Number 1, they operate at intersections. Number 2, they manage context. Number 3, they think like a product manager. And number 4, they run into disruption. So let's talk about the first one, operating at intersections. Talks about different types of leaders, right? So we've got the disruptive leader. This is Silicon Valley. Everything is thought of as horizontal. Software, a platform. Mark Zuckerberg woke up today and he said there's 8.5 billion people in the world. 2.5 billion people will use Meta products today. He's thinking there's 6 billion people to go. He thinks about workers as being flexible and maybe in the gig economy. He wants customers on a single platform, and the government mindset is really libertarian. Leave us alone. The incumbent leader, this is generally large established organizations. We see this in Japan with the large keiretsu and the large conglomerates. They're often vertical. They're hardware based very often. They think about continuous improvement. When I was at GE, if I gave my customers a 5 to 7% cost improvement every year, they never left me. I think about customers having units of one, highly customized solutions. And government, I would engage with government. The systems leaders combines attributes of both of these types of leaders. They're scalable on both axes of horizontal and vertical. They know what it means to build a platform that can be scaled globally, but that can be highly customized at the front end. They think of outcomes of not winner take all, but driving towards a dominant market share where possible. They think about the future of work very differently. They think about portfolio careers. To a systems leader, the future of work is not about in-office versus remote. A systems leader thinks about a future of work as a portfolio career. I have a portfolio career. I'm on the faculty at Stanford. I'm a venture capitalist. I'm also a consultant to companies. And then finally, you have a balanced view towards government, right? Systems leaders realize that government's going to be their new business partner, especially given a lot of the challenges that Yamaguchi-san highlighted in his slides. If we go to the next slide, the final 3 behaviors that we see in systems leaders is they know how to manage context. One of the key lines that I talk about in the book, and I work with my clients and in the classroom, I will say that truth equals facts plus context. Every day we turn on our computer or we look at our phones when we wake up and we're like, oh my goodness, what happened last night? And there are these so much change that happens in the news and in business and technology on a daily basis that we have to help set the context for what these changes mean for our employees, for our suppliers, and for our customers. So great systems leaders are wonderful communicators. The third thing that I think great systems leaders do is they have what I call a product manager's mindset. Now, if anybody was a product manager inside of an organization, the joke I like to say is that product managers are responsible for everything and they own nothing. And they have to get an organization to move in a way that will create good solutions for customers. Great product managers know what customers want. They know exactly how a product gets built, and they know what the go-to-market momentum is on the selling of a product. Great systems leaders have that product manager's mindset. And then lastly, great systems leaders, the last behavior that they show is they run into disruption. All of us, Yamaguchi-san, we don't like disruption. Humans really struggle with change. And oftentimes when it's really volatile, we sometimes just want to, curl up in a ball and hope that the change will pass us by. But really we can't do that because we know that given that things are changing, if we try to stay where we are, we will get left behind. Great systems leaders run into disruption. They run towards the disruption. Now that's scary and we might get things wrong, but it's the only path to potentially get things right. I like to use the analogy of an automobile. What's outside the front windshield is not what's in the rearview mirror. And so when things are changing, we have to move with that change and move with that flow and not be afraid of it.
Today's management challenges is not balancing between tangible and connected intangible paradigms. Leaders must change the mixed paradigm of tangible and connected intangible economy because hardware products are embedded with software and data. This requires a new type of leadership, which I categorize as reinvention leader. I am also very impressed by these capabilities mentioned in your book, which are essence of solving the cross pressures. Before moving to the details of the cross pressures, I would like to spell out the capabilities for system leaders. First, we operate at intersections. We do not choose one goal or the other. We hold innovation and execution, global and local, old strengths and new application together. Second, we prepare for the future, constantly asking how new technology and idea will reshape the different parts of our organization, and deliberately challenging our own biases. Third, we manage context, not just the fact, but the story around them so people can separate real signals from noise. Fourth, we think like product managers, staying close to experts and users, listening deeply to their problems. Finally, we embrace risk in uncertainty, going toward the toughest challenges and being very conscious of how we spend time and what is skill versus luck.
So Yamaguchi-san, maybe we can spend a few minutes talking about the cross pressures and some of the key things that we learned from some of the leaders around the world. Now, I talked about the first cross pressure of priorities. How do we succeed simultaneously at execution and innovation? One of the companies we studied is a small Islamic bank in Kuwait called Bubian Bank. And Adil Al-Majid, who is the CEO of the bank, when he took over, the bank in 2014, the bank was really struggling. They had $4 billion in assets, and their loan balances were very risky. And so what they tried to figure out is how could they improve the bank? And the first thing they did was they looked at the population of Kuwait. Now, this Islamic bank, who wanted it to be true to its Sharia compliance products and services, first wanted it to figure out what did the customers and the citizens of Kuwait, how did they feel about this? Now, about 15% of the Kuwaiti population would only bank with an Islamic bank. 15% of the Kuwaiti population would never bank with an Islamic bank. And 70% of the Kuwaiti population didn't care. They just wanted a good bank. And so what they realized is that there was a false choice. They could attract new customers and retain existing customers. So they invested heavily in digital. They became very, very much at the forefront of digital banking in Kuwait. They pioneered innovations like using the ability to take cash out of an ATM machine without having a card. And that attracted the younger population. They simultaneously invested in branches around the country so they could invest and give better service to their existing customers. So they could attract the new customers with the digital and retain their existing customers. And what they found was that they were able to, within 8 years, make the bank 5 times larger. Their balance sheet went from 4 billion to 20 billion. They expanded very, very aggressively and successfully across the GCC region, the Gulf Cooperation Council region, and have actually now started to make progress in parts of Europe. So one of the things that Adil showed us was that you could succeed at both execution and innovation at the same time. One of the things I want to talk about, Yamaguchi-san, you talked about AI, which is obviously really important for all of our clients and customers today, and how do we prioritize and customize our solutions? From the concept of systems leadership, I think there are 3 things that leaders need to address when it comes to AI, 3 critical requirements. The first is whoever a company buys its LLM from, they need to think about those people as technology suppliers. And you'll notice that suppliers are in bold and italics. I want to make this point, it's very important. Whoever a company gets its AI from, make sure that the AI is being used for your company's benefit and not for the benefit of the supplier who's giving you the technology. Make sure your data stays safe and secure and within the confines of what you need to do for your customers. You would not put a faulty component in an automobile or in a medical device. And similarly, if you're going to bring AI into your company, make sure that your suppliers are working for your benefit and not just theirs. Secondly, there's going to be a profound impact on the labor force. AI, we're seeing around the world how it's changing jobs, not just getting rid of jobs, but changing how jobs are being done. And leaders need to be aware of who's going to be impacted by AI inside of their organizations. I had the front row seat here in Silicon Valley at the creation of the personal computer, the smartphone, the internet, social media. I've never seen a technology take off so quickly as this one before on a global basis. And we as leaders need to be thinking about how that's going to impact our labor force. And the third thing is we as leaders need to enter the workflow and bring AI into everything that we do. What I like to say is that today's leaders need to develop what I call an AI reflex. Now, Yamaguchi-san, if you and I wanted to communicate with each other, we have a digital reflex. You might say, I will call Rob. You might say, I'll send him an email. You might say, you'll send me a text or maybe a WhatsApp message. We need to now develop AI reflexes for our workflows. If I'm going to be developing a teaching plan for a new course or a new case that I'm writing, I've got to be thinking about how I'm going to be using AI from the beginning for how I do my tasks. And that's really, really important for leaders to embrace when we talk about that execution and innovation at the same time. if we can move, actually, I think you might want to have a comment on this particular cross pressure, if I remember, Yamaguchi-san.
Thank you, Robert. I always face this priority issues as an executive. Let me share my experience in priorities. When I led a $4 billion revenue organization at an IT service company, I was responsible for both large-scale software development with strict quality, schedule, and cost targets, and for new ventures that required speed and experimentation. I ran the business under one integrated organizational vision while prioritizing the large, stable software development. We were able to successfully launch new ventures toward future visions. I recognize making organizational vision is critical for solving this cross pressure.
Now maybe we can talk about the second cross pressure. People, how do we manage with both strength and empathy? An example of a leader that I spent time with is a woman named Kathy Mazzarella, who's the CEO of a company called Graybar. Now, Graybar used to be known as Western Electric. They're now about $12 billion in revenue, and they supply electrical components to a variety of companies around the world. And they have about 10,000 employees as of today, and they're really very successful right now with the build out of all of the AI data centers. Now, Kathy's a really interesting leader. She's one of the leaders, she reminds me of you, Yamaguchi-san. When she walks into a room, we all sit up a little bit straighter because we know how good of a leader she is. And we know who these leaders are when we see them in our career. And also like you, Yamaguchi-san, I would say that Kathy is also one of the kindest and nicest people I know. And she shows us, she was once described by somebody as an iron fist and a soft glove. This is somebody who's very strong and very capable. But when she's dealing with personnel, if she's dealing with issues where people are not performing, one of the things that she will ask herself is, do I have a skill set problem with this employee? Or is there something going on in their life that I need to be aware of that might be preventing this leader from being successful? When I was teaching the case on Graybar, she took over the class, and after about 4 minutes, she looked at my students and said to them a line I'll never forget. Leadership is about everybody but you. And I loved that mindset where it really kind of showed that you could be a strong leader, a great, competent leader, a leader who is very, very ambitious, but also you could be thinking about leading people in ways that are kind and thoughtful, and you see the people on the other side. Another great leader we studied, and perhaps we can go to the next slide, was somebody by the name of Revathi Advaithi, who's the CEO of Flex Flex is the name of the company now. They are the world's largest contract manufacturer for electronics products. And we look at the picture and we see that most of their factories today are very clean and very technically focused. But Revathi also invests heavily in her labor force for retraining. They've trained thousands and thousands of their employees on cultural reskilling, not just technical reskilling. So they have factories in places like Mexico and Poland. And Mexico and Poland have very different cultures. But if those two factories need to work together to deliver a solution to a customer, Revathi will be very involved in trying to make sure that culturally both those factories know how to communicate well. There was a great sociologist named Heather McGowan who used the phrase, learning is the new pension. And what I love about that is technology is moving so quickly. Most educational systems are having a hard time keeping up. Even those of us here at Stanford University, we're having a hard time keeping up with how fast the technology is moving and being deployed. And business leaders around the world are going to have to be continually investing in their labor force. It's actually 40% less expensive to retrain and reskill somebody than it is to fire somebody and hire somebody new. So you can actually invest in your people, and that's good both for the bottom line, that's good for, economically, it's good for your company, but it's also good more broadly for the men and women who you're giving the opportunity to stay at the forefront of their skills to contribute to their organizations.
I agree that issues related to people become more important. I would like to share my experience as well. To balance strictness and empathy, we first aligned on the same direction, the growth of our people and the growth of the organization. From there, we adopted a clear policy. We would support anyone who was genuinely trying to grow, but we would not tolerate passive inaction from people who are not contributing to that growth. This principle allowed me to be very strict about expectation and at the same time deeply empathetic toward those who are making an effort. In other words, strength and empathy were not in conflict. They reinforced each other.
I liked how you phrased that, because everything we talk about in systems leadership is about the and. It's not the verses as you talked about in that slide, but we need to, as leaders, to be able to bring them both inside. Yeah. Now, the third cross pressure is sphere of influence. Sphere of influence is, how do we think about internal and external? Charlie Scharf is the CEO of Wells Fargo Bank. And Wells Fargo Bank, as you may recall, about 6 years ago, now 7 years ago, committed some very bad fraud. They opened up a bunch of customer accounts and they had to change out their leadership team. And Charlie came in and he started spending time with leaders both internally and externally. He started spending time with the regulators in government. And the regulators in the government were angry at Wells Fargo. I mean, their position was, they were being accused of being asleep at the wheel. They were being accused of being too close to the bank. And their attitude was like, they didn't commit the fraud. The fraud was committed by the people at Wells Fargo. So Charlie had to spend a lot of time rebuilding trust. Similarly, he had to spend time internally. A lot of people inside were upset. How did these leaders in these few divisions make such bad choices that put the company at risk? But Charlie also found that it was important to rebuild the culture inside, because there wasn't enough respect and collaboration mindset with regulators or even the communities where Wells Fargo did work. Now, when Charlie took over, the US federal government had what was called an asset cap on the bank. Literally, the government of the United States said to Wells Fargo, you cannot grow. We're going to legally prevent it. Charlie had to spend 6 years building trust externally, rebuilding the cultural internally, such that at the end of 6 years, the US government lifted the asset cap, and now Wells Fargo, their stock price has almost doubled in the last year, and they're really getting to play offense and being aggressive. He really understood he needed to be both internal and external. Another leader I like to talk about is Seth Bodnar. Seth is the CEO and president, of the University of Montana education system, which I believe we have a slide that we can show on this. Seth has to deal with many, many stakeholders, but he's got one mission. His one mission is to be able to educate people that can be contributing members for the state of Montana and to the economy. And he's got many, many stakeholders, some internal, some external. This picture on the screen is what's called an influence map, where the University of Montana is in the center. And you see the circles around, all of the people and entities that some of whom influence each other and some of whom are dependent upon each other, from students to faculty to local employers to alumni to administrators to even the government. And he's got to constantly be thinking about his ever-changing ecosystem. So he needs to think about what's happening both inside the university as well as what's happening outside.
Let me share my experience partially related to this cross pressure. The system development project I was responsible for requires the cooperation of many partners in order to satisfy client requirements. I consistently considered what kind of value we could deliver to our customers, how we should develop our internal capabilities, in particular, the growth of our employees, and how we should build and manage relationship with our partners. Rather than aiming to strike a balance for its own sake, I focus on aligning internal and external stakeholders in order to achieve our objectives.
The fourth cross pressure that I highlight is the notion of thinking locally and globally. And one of the great leaders we studied is Khaldun al-Mubarak, who is the CEO of Mubadala. And Khaldun this is Abu Dhabi's one of their largest sovereign wealth funds. It's over $300 billion in assets. And one of the things Khaldun taught me was that before oil was discovered in the United Arab Emirates, their main export was pearls. They were pearl traders. They would dive in the waters off their coast, harvest the pearls, and trade with their neighbors in the Middle East. And he taught me that the DNA of Emiratis is trade. And what they truly try to figure out is how do they have a global perspective and understand local obligations. They try to maintain productive relationships with all countries, have a friends to all approach, avoid exclusive alliances, and on difficult situations, use multiple lenses to look at what's going on. And you think about the United Arab Emirates, the whole country only has about 1.3 million citizens. And yet this is a country that plays a very important role in geopolitics, in economics. I mean, their largest customer is China for their oil, and yet their security guarantor is the United States. By understanding local and global, they can meet the needs of the Emirati citizens, but also understand global dynamics. Another person we studied in this area was a gentleman by the name of Bill Winters. And if we can go to the next slide, he's the CEO of Standard Chartered Bank. They try to hire local people. They do business throughout Southeast Asia, throughout the Middle East, throughout Africa. If Coca-Cola wants to sell their products in Angola, in Africa, Standard Chartered can help them find bottlers, payment systems, distributors, and suppliers. And so they've got local people on the ground to help their international customers. The other thing I also find interesting about Bill and how they think about things is sometimes their customers and their clients will be caught because the laws between two countries might conflict. This country might say, you have to give us all your customer data. And this country's law says you can't give away your customer data. Bill will often work behind the scenes to help their clients understand global complexity